It was a quiet autumn evening in the small town of Willow Creek, Oregon, when 17-year-old Emily Carter vanished without a trace. The year was 1987, and the town was wrapped in the golden hues of fall, with crisp leaves crunching underfoot and a sense of calm before the winter chill. Emily was last seen leaving her part-time job at the local diner, Gracie's Grill, just after her evening shift at 8:15 p.m. Witnesses recalled seeing her walking toward the shortcut through Willow Creek Woods, a path she'd taken 100 times before. But that night, Emily never made it home. Weeks turned into months, and despite exhaustive searches by police and volunteers, Emily's whereabouts remained a haunting mystery. Her family, desperate for answers, clung to hope even as whispers of something darker began to ripple through the close-knit community. Nearly a year later, in the 19th of October '88, a chilling discovery was made. A new family had moved into an old Victorian-style house just on the outskirts of town, at the end of Crescent Road. While renovating the basement stairs, they uncovered something no one could have imagined: a loose wooden step concealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a weathered handwritten note, scrawled in shaky penmanship. "Help me, I'm trapped." The note was unsigned, but the handwriting bore a chilling resemblance to Emily's, according to her mother, who broke down in tears when shown a copy. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was Emily somehow alive and being held captive nearby? Who had lived in that house before? And could they have had something to do with her disappearance? The police reopened the case, but the investigation only deepened the mystery. Beneath the stairs, they found more cryptic clues: a small charm bracelet, a faded photograph of Emily with her best friend, and an old map with seemingly random markings across Willow Creek. The town was gripped with unease as questions mounted. Where had these items come from? Who had hidden them? And why? And most importantly, what had happened to Emily Carter? The autumn air grew colder, and with it came a sense of dread. The once idyllic town of Willow Creek now seemed cloaked in shadows as secrets long buried began to resurface. The discovery under the stairs quickly became the talk of the town. Crescent Road, once a quiet street, now attracted curious onlookers, reporters, and investigators. The house, with its peeling paint and sagging porch, seemed to hold more secrets than anyone could have guessed. The new owners, the Dawson family, had no idea they'd stepped into a mystery that would grip the entire town. Detective Michael Harrington, the lead investigator in Emily's disappearance, returned to Willow Creek after hearing the news. He had worked on Emily's case the year prior, tirelessly following every lead until it seemed to vanish into thin air just like Emily. Now, with fresh evidence in hand, Harrington was determined to find answers. The photograph found beneath the stairs was examined carefully. It showed Emily and her best friend, Lisa Harper, at the Willow Creek County Fair just weeks before Emily disappeared. Lisa, now in her early 30s and living 2 towns over, was brought in for questioning. "I haven't thought about that night in years," Lisa said, her voice trembling as she studied the photograph. She loved that fair. She was so happy that night, but something changed the week before she disappeared. Emily started acting strange, like she was scared of something. When pressed for details, Lisa hesitated. "She told me she thought someone was following her. I thought she was just being paranoid." But now, her voice trailed off, leaving an uneasy silence. Silence in the room. The map found with Emily's belongings was another puzzling clue. It appeared to be hand-drawn, with faint markings scattered across it. One mark in particular caught Harrington's attention. It was near the abandoned sawmill on the outskirts of town. The mill had been shut down for years, but locals often said it was a favorite hangout spot for teenagers looking for trouble. A search party was organized to comb the area. The sawmill stood as a hulking, decrepit structure, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of decay. Inside, the team found more unsettling evidence: a small pile of burnt clothing, a rusted knife, and a series of scratches etched into the wooden beams, as if someone had been counting the days. The deeper they searched, the more the story began to take shape. A neighbor who lived near the sawmill recalled hearing strange noises late at night. Around the time Emily vanished, muffled screams and the sound of heavy objects being dragged, but no one had thought much of it at the time. As the investigation progressed, Harrington began piecing together a disturbing timeline. The previous owner of the house on Crescent Road, a reclusive man named Samuel Grayson, had left Willow Creek suddenly in early 1988. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, but off. Some claimed they'd seen him digging in his backyard late at night, while others said he often disappeared for days at a time. Grayson was tracked down in a small town in Montana, living under a different name. When confronted by police, he denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance. But his nervous demeanor and refusal to answer certain questions raised suspicions. A search of his property revealed more maps and journals, each filled with cryptic symbols and unsettling sketches of women's faces, some of which bore a striking resemblance to Emily. Meanwhile, back in Willow Creek, the Dawsons continued their renovations on the house, only to uncover more chilling discoveries. Behind a false wall in the basement was a narrow hidden passageway. The air was damp and cold, the walls lined with wooden shelves holding old jars, photographs, and what appeared to be personal belongings of multiple people. One jar held a lock of blonde hair tied with a blue ribbon, the exact shade Emily was known to wear. Another contained a bracelet engraved with the initials MH, which was later identified as belonging to Megan Harper, a girl who had gone missing from a neighboring town 5 years earlier. The hidden passage led to a small, windowless room. Inside, the walls were covered in frantic scrawls, words like help, trapped, and run, etched deep into the wood. On the floor was a single metal chair bolted to the ground, with rusted chains dangling from its arms. The evidence was mounting, but one question remained unanswered. Why had Emily's belongings been hidden under the stairs, seemingly left behind for someone to find? And why had Samuel Grayson left town so suddenly? As Harrington delved deeper into Grayson's past, a pattern began to emerge. In every town he had lived in, there had been a string of disappearances, always young women, always under mysterious circumstances. But Grayson had never been charged, and in most cases, the missing persons were never found. The discovery of Emily's note, the hidden passageway, and the evidence at the sawmill pointed to a horrifying conclusion, but the case was far from over. Harrington knew there was more to uncover, more secrets buried in the shadows of Willow Creek. The townspeople, once united by the hope of finding Emily, were now divided by fear and suspicion. Some believed Grayson was the sole perpetrator, while others whispered about a larger, more sinister conspiracy. The woods around the town seemed darker, the nights quieter, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to emerge. The Dawson family, shaken by their discovery, moved out of the house within weeks. The property was left abandoned, once again a chilling reminder of the secrets it held. But Harrington wasn't ready to let go. He returned to the house one final time, determined to find the last piece of the puzzle. In the dim light of his flashlight, he noticed something he had missed before a faint bloodstain on the floorboards near the hidden passageway. As forensic experts worked to analyze it, Harrington couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of uncovering something far bigger than he had imagined. The blood stain on the floorboards was faint, as though time had worked tirelessly to erase its existence. Forensic analysts estimated it had been there for years, possibly decades, but the sample was large enough to test. As Detective Harrington waited for the results, the town of Willow Creek seemed to sink deeper into unease. Parents began walking their children to school, locking their doors at dusk, and avoiding the woods entirely. The tension was palpable at Gracie's Grill, the diner where Emily had last been seen. Longtime regulars whispered among themselves, speculating about Grayson's connection to the case and what might have happened in that old house on Crescent Road. The waitress, an older woman named Clara, claimed to remember the night Emily disappeared vividly. She was quiet that evening, Clara told Harrington when he stopped by to ask more questions. Usually she'd chat with me about school or her plans, but that night she seemed distracted, like she had something on her mind. Clara paused as though hesitant to share more. I remember a man coming in just before her shift ended. He sat in the corner booth and didn't order anything, just stared at her the whole time. It made me uneasy, but I didn't say anything. I figured it wasn't my business. Clara's description of the man was vague, but it matched Samuel Grayson's appearance at the time. Tall, lean, with dark eyes and a quiet demeanor. Harrington thanked her and left the diner with more questions than answers. Back at the precinct, the forensic results came in. The blood stain on the floorboards in the Dawson house was a match for Emily Carter. It confirmed what many had already feared: Emily had been in that house at some point after her disappearance. But was it the place where her life had ended, or had she been held captive and moved elsewhere? Harrington's investigation into Samuel Grayson's journals provided more unsettling insights. Among the cryptic symbols and maps were entries that hinted at a twisted obsession with rituals and control. One passage, dated 6 months before Emily disappeared, read, "The woods hide what the world must not see. She will be the first, but not the last. Beneath the earth they will find silence." This passage, coupled with the scratches and markings found at the sawmill, suggested that Emily wasn't Grayson's only victim. Harrington began looking into other missing persons cases in nearby towns, focusing on patterns that aligned with Grayson's movements over the years. One name stood out: Megan Harper, the girl whose bracelet had been found in the hidden room. Megan had vanished in 1982, 5 years before Emily, under circumstances that were eerily similar. She had been walking home from a friend's house one evening when she disappeared without a trace. Her case had gone cold, but her family had always believed she was taken by someone who knew the area well. Harrington visited Megan's parents, who still lived in the same house they had when she was a teenager. Mrs. Harper, now in her 60s, showed him Megan's childhood bedroom, which had been left untouched since the day she vanished. On the wall above the bed was a photograph of Megan wearing the bracelet, the same one found beneath the stairs. "This was her favorite piece of jewelry," Mrs. Harper said, tears welling in her eyes. "She never took it off. How did you find it?" Harrington explained the discovery at the Dawson house, careful not to reveal too many details. The Harpers were devastated but hopeful that this new lead might finally bring them answers. As Harrington worked to connect the dots, a chilling new development emerged. Another note was found in the hidden passageway, wedged between the floorboards. It was written in the same shaky handwriting as the first and read, "They watch, they wait. Don't trust the shadows." The note sent shivers down Harrington's spine. Who was they, and what did the message mean? Was Emily warning about multiple perpetrators, or was her mind playing tricks on her in captivity? The townspeople grew increasingly restless as rumors spread about the new discovery. Some believed Grayson had accomplices, while others speculated that something supernatural was at play. The woods surrounding Willow Creek, long regarded as a peaceful retreat for hikers and campers, now felt menacing and oppressive. Harrington knew he needed to act quickly. He assembled a team to search the woods near the sawmill more thoroughly, using the map found beneath the stairs as their guide. The markings on the map seemed random at first, but with closer inspection, they appeared to align with specific locations: clearings in the woods, old logging roads, and abandoned structures. One of the marked locations led the team to a shallow grave. Inside were the remains of a young woman, later identified as Megan Harper. Her body had been carefully placed, her hands folded across her chest, and her blue ribbon still tied around her hair. The discovery of Megan's remains was a breakthrough, but it also deepened the mystery. Why had Grayson, or whoever was responsible, kept her bracelet in the house on Crescent Road? Was it a trophy, or was there another reason? As the investigation progressed, Harrington found himself haunted by dreams of Emily, her face pale and pleading, her voice echoing the words of the note, "Don't trust the shadows." The weight of the case was beginning to take its toll, but he refused to give up. In a final effort to uncover the truth, Harrington returned to the sawmill alone, determined to find any overlooked clues. As he ventured deeper into the decaying structure, the air grew colder, and the sound of his footsteps echoed eerily in the silence. In the darkest corner of the mill, He found a trap door concealed beneath a pile of debris. It led to a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough to crawl through. The tunnel stretched on for what felt like miles, twisting and turning until it opened into a hidden chamber. Inside, the walls were covered with more scrawled messages, some familiar, like, "Help me," and others new. They are always watching. In the center of the room was a table covered in objects, candles, photographs, and what appeared to be a crude altar. Among the items was a journal bound in leather and stained with age. The handwriting inside matched the notes found beneath the stairs, and the entries revealed a horrifying truth. The journal was brittle to the touch, its pages yellowed and curling at the edges. Detective Harrington carefully flipped through the entries, his flashlight casting long shadows across the chamber walls. The handwriting was frantic, with sentences crammed into every available space on the page. The first entries were mundane, detailing daily routines and the occasional note about the weather. But as he read further, the tone shifted, becoming darker and more erratic. The writer, likely Samuel Grayson, described hearing voices in the woods, whispers that seemed to call his name at night. "They tell me secrets," one entry read. "They promise me things if I listen. The woods are alive. They breathe. They wait." The next page described a chilling encounter. "I saw her today. She walked through the woods alone, as if the trees weren't watching her. She doesn't belong here. They told me she was the one. She must stay." Harrington's heart raced as he realized the writer was likely referring to Emily. The journal entries became more disjointed, with long, incoherent ramblings interrupted by chilling descriptions of captivity. "She cries at night, but they don't care. They said it must be done. The stairs will keep her safe. The house will hold the truth. I can't let her go. They'll be angry if I do." Harrington's hands trembled as he turned the page. The final entry was written in red ink, the words larger and more erratic than before. "They watch from the shadows. They won't let me leave. She knows too much. I hear her voice even when she's silent. The stairs aren't enough anymore. They'll take her if I don't." The page ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted. Harrington closed the journal, his mind racing with possibilities. The entries painted a horrifying picture of a man descending into madness, but they also hinted at something more, a presence in the woods, something Grayson believed was guiding his actions. The chamber itself offered few additional clues. The altar was covered in symbols that matched those in the journal, and the photographs scattered across the table were of young women, many of whom had been reported missing over the years. Emily's photograph was among them, her face circled in red ink. As Harrington climbed back through the tunnel and emerged from the sawmill, he was struck by the oppressive silence of the woods. The trees seemed to close in around him, their bare branches reaching out like skeletal hands. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Back at the precinct, Harrington presented the journal to his team. The handwriting was confirmed to match samples of Grayson's, but the cryptic nature of the entries left much to interpretation. Was Grayson truly acting on the orders of some unseen force, or was he simply a disturbed man using the woods as a scapegoat for his crimes? As the investigation continued, a new lead emerged. A retired sheriff's deputy named Arthur Mills came forward, claiming to have information about the house on Crescent Road. Mills, who had served in Willow Creek during the 1970s, said the property had a dark history that predated Grayson's ownership. "That house has always been strange," Mills explained. "There were rumors about it long before Grayson moved in. People said it was cursed, that bad things happened there. In the 50s, a family disappeared without a trace. No one ever figured out what happened to them. And in the 60s, a drifter was found dead in the basement, his body covered in strange symbols. No one wanted to live there after that." Mills also mentioned an urban legend about the woods surrounding the house. Locals called it the Silent Grove, a place where people claimed to hear whispers and see shadows that didn't belong. Some believed the grove was cursed, while others thought it was haunted by the spirits of those who had disappeared. Harrington wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, but the connection between the house, the woods, and Grayson's journal was too strong to ignore. He decided to visit the Silent Grove. With a small team, hoping to find answers to the questions that continued to haunt him, The grove was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant caw of a crow. The deeper they ventured, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The trees seemed to lean closer together, blocking out the sunlight and casting everything in an eerie twilight. In the center of the grove, the team found a clearing with a large stone altar covered in moss and strange carvings. The symbols matched those found in Grayson's journal and the hidden chamber at the sawmill. Nearby, they discovered a ring of burned-out candles and a pile of bones animal, thankfully, but disturbing nonetheless. As they searched the area, one of the officers called out, "Detective, over here!" Harrington rushed over to find a small rusted tin box buried beneath a tree. Inside were more photographs, another map, and a locket engraved with the initials E.C. Emily Carter. The discovery solidified the connection between the Silent Grove and Emily's disappearance. But as the team prepared to leave, they heard something that made their blood run cold, a faint whisper carried on the wind, too soft to make out, but unmistakably human. Harrington froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his holstered weapon. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The other officers nodded, their eyes wide with fear. The whisper came again, louder this time but still incomprehensible. It seemed to come from all around them, as though the trees themselves were speaking. Without a word, the team retreated from the grove, their unease growing with every step. Back at the precinct, Harrington reviewed the new evidence. The map marked several more locations, including one deep in the woods near an old quarry. He decided to organize another search, determined to uncover the truth about what had happened to Emily and the others. But as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Harrington couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something far bigger and far darker than he had ever imagined. Detective Harrington knew the quarry was their last chance. The map had led them this far, and every clue pointed to this place as the center of whatever evil had gripped Willow Creek for decades. The air around the quarry was damp and heavy, carrying an unnatural stillness that set everyone on edge. As the search team descended into the quarry, the narrow path twisted between jagged rock formations, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and move with every flicker of their flashlights. At the bottom, they discovered a cavernous opening, partially hidden by overgrown brush. Inside, the cavern walls were lined with symbols identical to those found in Samuel Grayson's journal and the Silent Grove. A chilling realization struck Harrington. This place had been used for years, possibly decades, by someone or something operating in the shadows. Deeper in the cavern, the team found a series of makeshift rooms separated by wooden partitions. One contained a crude sleeping area with a rotting mattress and piles of old clothing. Another held rows of glass jars filled with strange objects, locks of hair, photographs, personal trinkets that likely belonged to the victims. At the far end of the cavern, Harrington found a larger room dominated by a stone altar. The surface was stained dark, and around it were more burned-out candles and small animal bones. On the altar was a tattered notebook, similar to Grayson's journal. Harrington opened the notebook and immediately recognized Emily's handwriting. The pages were filled with desperate pleas for help, recounting her captivity and her growing fear of her captor. "He's not alone," one entry read. "There's something else. I can feel it watching me, even when he's gone. It whispers to him, tells him what to do. He says he can't stop it." The final entry sent chills down Harrington's spine. "They're coming for me. I don't think I'll leave this place alive. If someone finds this, please tell my parents I love them, and tell Lisa I'm sorry I didn't believe her. Don't trust the shadows." The cavern began to feel suffocating, the air heavy with the weight of the truth. Harrington and his team gathered as much evidence as they could and returned to the surface, their grim findings casting a pall over the town. In the weeks that followed, Samuel Grayson was formally charged in connection with the disappearances of Emily Carter and Megan Harper. The physical evidence, combined with his journals and the items found in the quarry, painted a damning picture. But even as justice seemed within reach, there were lingering questions about the whispers, the symbols, and the darkness that seemed to permeate Willow Creek. The Silent Grove was fenced off, the quarry sealed, and the Dawson family's house remained abandoned. But the people of Willow Creek were forever changed. Parents warned their children to stay away from the woods, and whispers of the curse spread like wildfire. Detective Harrington retired soon after the case closed. The years had taken their toll, and the nightmares of Emily and the others haunted him long after he left Willow Creek. One rainy evening, months after the trial, Harrington received a package in the mail. There was no return address, but inside was a single photograph of Emily, her face circled in red ink, and a note written in shaky handwriting. "They're still here. Don't trust the shadows." Harrington stared at the note, his heart pounding. The whispers, the symbols, the fear, none of it had truly ended, and deep down, he knew it never would. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, some shadows couldn't be escaped, and some secrets would always stay buried, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon them. The unresolved case of Dennis Martin, a mystery that continues to haunt America. The 14th of the 19th of June, 69, a warm summer afternoon in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a place where nature stretches endlessly, its beauty both breathtaking and untamed. Families flock here to escape the noise of city life, to reconnect with each other under the shade of towering trees and beside crystal-clear streams. But on this day, something sinister unfolded, a story that would leave an indelible mark on the hearts of those who heard it. A tale that continues to linger like a shadow over one of America's most beloved national parks. Dennis Martin, just 6 years old, was a bright-eyed boy with a mop of dark hair and a smile that could light up any room. He was part of a close-knit family from Knoxville, Tennessee, who had decided to spend their weekend camping in the wilderness. They chose Spence Field, a remote area known for its sweeping vistas and rugged terrain. It seemed like the perfect getaway, a chance to bond, explore, and create memories far away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Little did they know this trip would become the setting for one of the most haunting mysteries in American history. The day began like any other. The sun filtered through the dense canopy of leaves, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds chirped melodiously, and the air carried the faint scent of pine and earth. Dennis, his older brother Douglas, and their father William set out on a short hike after lunch. The plan was simple: enjoy the outdoors, take in the scenery, and return to their campsite before sunset. But as fate would have it, simplicity turned to chaos within moments. It happened during a game of hide-and-seek. Dennis and Douglas decided to play while their father rested nearby. The rules were straightforward: hide, then wait to be found. But the environment was anything but ordinary. The woods surrounding them were thick and labyrinthine, filled with gnarled roots, moss-covered rocks, and shadows that danced eerily in the shifting sunlight. At first, everything seemed normal. Douglas hid behind a tree trunk, giggling softly as he imagined Dennis searching for him. But when Dennis didn't reappear after several minutes, Douglas grew concerned. He called out his brother's name, his voice tinged with worry. No response came. Panic began to creep into the atmosphere. William Martin, hearing his son's voices fade into silence, stood up and scanned the area. "Dennis!" he shouted, his tone rising with urgency. Still, there was no answer. The once peaceful forest now felt oppressive, its vastness swallowing sound whole. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the family frantically searched every nearby bush, hollow log, and rocky crevice. Their calls echoed through the trees, unanswered by the child who had vanished without a trace. As dusk approached, the temperature dropped, and the mood shifted from concern to dread. The Martins realized they needed help. They flagged down a passing hiker who immediately alerted park rangers. What followed was one of the largest search and rescue operations ever conducted in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Over 100 volunteers joined forces with professional rescuers, combing miles of treacherous terrain. Helicopters buzzed. Overhead, their rotors slicing through the stillness of the sky. Bloodhounds sniffed the ground, following faint scents that might lead them to the missing boy. Yet, despite all these efforts, Dennis remained elusive, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Rumors began to spread among the search teams. Some claimed to have seen movement in the distance, a small figure darting between trees. Others spoke of strange noises echoing through the valleys at night, sounds that couldn't be explained by wildlife alone. One witness reported spotting a young boy running through the woods, though whether it was Dennis or merely a trick of the mind remained unclear. Each lead fizzled out, leaving behind more questions than answers. The media descended upon the park, hungry for details about the case. Reporters interviewed the Martin family, capturing their anguish on camera. Neighbors rallied around them, offering support and prayers. Meanwhile, speculation ran rampant. Was Dennis lost, injured, or worse? Had he wandered too far and fallen victim to the elements, or was there something darker at play, a predator lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike? One particularly chilling theory emerged early in the investigation. A man named Harold Kaiser, who lived near the park, came forward with a bizarre confession. He claimed that on the evening of the 14th of June, he had been attacked by a bear while walking along a trail. In self-defense, he fired his rifle, startling the animal and driving it away. However, he also admitted to seeing a child nearby during the incident. Though he insisted he hadn't harmed anyone, his account raised eyebrows and fueled suspicions. Could Dennis have encountered this man or someone else in the woods? Investigators looked into Kaiser's background but ultimately found no concrete evidence linking him to the disappearance. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to wane. The search operation scaled back, though dedicated individuals continued to scour the park for clues. Flyers bearing Dennis's photo were plastered across townships, urging anyone with information to come forward. Psychics offered their services, claiming to sense the boy's presence in specific locations. None of these leads panned out. The case grew colder with each passing season. Yet the memory of Dennis Martin refused to fade. Decades later, the mystery endures. People still visit Spence Field, drawn not only by its natural beauty but also by the lingering aura of tragedy. Hikers whisper stories of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena, convinced that Dennis's spirit roams the forest, unable to find peace. Others believe he met a grim fate, his body hidden somewhere, deep within the park, buried beneath layers of soil and time. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this story is how easily it could happen again. The Great Smoky Mountains are a place of wonder, yes, but also of danger. Its trails twist unpredictably. Its weather shifts without warning. Its isolation can turn a momentary lapse into a lifetime of regret. Dennis Martin's disappearance serves as a stark reminder of humanity's vulnerability in the face of nature's raw power. The passage of time has a way of softening memories. But for those who lived through the days following Dennis Martin's disappearance, the pain remains as sharp as ever. Decades may have passed since that fateful June afternoon. Yet the echoes of unanswered questions continue to reverberate through the lives of Dennis's family, friends, and even strangers who became captivated by the case. It is a story that refuses to fade, one that lingers not only because of its tragic nature, but also because of the countless theories, clues, and haunting details that refuse to fit neatly into any single narrative. The aftermath. A family shattered. For the Martin family, life after Dennis's disappearance was irrevocably altered. William Martin, Dennis's father, carried the weight of guilt like an invisible chain around his neck. He replayed the events of that day endlessly in his mind, searching for something he might have done differently. Could he have stopped the game of hide and seek? Should he have kept a closer eye on his sons? These questions haunted him, gnawing at his soul until they became inseparable from his very identity. Dennis's mother, though less vocal about her grief, bore it silently, her sorrow etched into every line of her face. She clung to hope for years, refusing to believe that her son was gone forever. Friends recall seeing her light candles late at night, whispering prayers into the darkness as if trying to reach Dennis across some unseen divide. Douglas, Dennis's older brother, grew up carrying the burden of survivor's guilt. Though he was just a child himself when the tragedy occurred, he often wondered why fate had spared him while taking his little brother away. As the years went by, the Martins became reluctant symbols of loss, their private anguish thrust into the public eye whenever new developments or the lack thereof surfaced in the case. They gave interviews sparingly, each appearance marked by raw emotion and unspoken pain. Despite their efforts to move forward, the absence of closure left a void that nothing could fill. The search effort, a monumental undertaking. In the immediate aftermath of Dennis's disappearance, the search operation was unprecedented in scale. Over 100 volunteers joined park rangers, law enforcement officers, and military personnel in combing the vast expanse of the Great Smoky Mountains. Helicopters equipped with spotlights scoured the treetops at night, while bloodhounds sniffed tirelessly along trails and creek beds. Divers plunged into icy streams, hoping against hope to find some trace of the boy. Yet, despite these Herculean efforts, Dennis seemed to have vanished completely. One particularly grueling aspect of the search was the terrain itself. The Great Smoky Mountains are notorious for their rugged landscapes, dense underbrush, and unpredictable weather patterns. Trails can twist and turn unexpectedly, leading hikers astray even under ideal conditions. For a 6-year-old child unfamiliar with the area, the odds of survival were slim. Rangers warned early on that hypothermia, dehydration, or injury could claim Dennis's life within hours if he were unable to find shelter. Yet nobody was ever found. Not a single piece of clothing, toy, or personal belonging turned up during the exhaustive sweeps. This absence of physical evidence baffled investigators and fueled speculation about what might have happened. Had Dennis wandered farther than anyone imagined, succumbing to the elements in a remote part of the park? Or had something or someone intervened? The witnesses, fragments of a puzzle. Among the most intriguing aspects of the case were the accounts provided by witnesses who claimed to have seen someone resembling Dennis in the days following his disappearance. One such account came from Harold Kaiser, the man who reported being attacked by a bear near Spence Field. While his confession raised suspicions, it also contained inconsistencies that cast doubt on his credibility. Investigators ultimately dismissed him as a suspect, though his testimony added another layer of mystery to the unfolding drama. Another witness, a hiker named John Stroud, recounted seeing a small boy running through the woods shortly after Dennis went missing. According to Stroud, the boy appeared disoriented, darting between trees before disappearing from view. When asked to describe the child, he noted features that matched Dennis's appearance: dark hair and a slight build, but admitted he couldn't be certain due to the fleeting nature of the encounter. These fragmented sightings created a tantalizing possibility. What if Dennis had survived longer than anyone thought? Could he have been wandering aimlessly, injured or frightened, only to meet an untimely end far from where the search teams focused their efforts? Or were these witnesses simply mistaken, their recollections warped by stress and fatigue? The theories, a kaleidoscope of possibilities. Over the years, countless theories have emerged to explain Dennis Martin's disappearance. Some are grounded in logic and probability, while others veer into the realm of the bizarre. Each offers a different lens through which to view the case, yet none provides definitive answers. Theory 1. Lost in the wilderness. The simplest explanation is also the most heartbreaking. Dennis, overwhelmed by the enormity of the forest, may have become disoriented and wandered off course. Without food, water, or proper shelter, he would have been vulnerable to the harsh realities of the wild. Hypothermia, dehydration, or a fall from a rocky ledge could have claimed his life, leaving his body hidden somewhere inaccessible to searchers. Supporters of this theory point to the park's sheer size and complexity as factors that hindered recovery efforts. Even today, with advanced technology and mapping tools, locating a missing person in such terrain poses significant challenges. In 1969, the task was exponentially more difficult. Theory 2. Animal attack. Another grim possibility is that Dennis fell victim to one of the park's native predators. Black bears are common in the Great Smoky Mountains, And while attacks on humans are rare, they are not unheard of. A bear, startled by Dennis's presence or drawn to him by curiosity, could have caused fatal injuries. If this were the case, Dennis's remains might have been scattered or consumed, explaining why no trace of him was ever found. Theory 3. Human intervention. Perhaps the most unsettling theory involves human involvement. Could Dennis have been abducted by someone lurking in the woods? Stranger danger was a real concern in the late 1960s, and isolated areas like Spence Field offered ample opportunity for malicious intent. However, no credible suspects emerged during the investigation, and the lack of ransom demands or other indicators makes this scenario unlikely. For some, the inexplicable nature of Dennis's disappearance lends itself to supernatural explanations. Stories of ghostly apparitions, strange noises, and eerie sensations have circulated among hikers and locals for decades. Some believe Dennis's spirit remains trapped in the park, unable to cross over due to the traumatic circumstances of his death. Others claim to have encountered him or felt his presence while exploring the trails. While these accounts add an air of mystique to the case, they offer little in the way of concrete evidence. Still, they underscore the profound impact Dennis's story has had on popular imagination. Today, Dennis Martin's name is synonymous with the enduring allure of unsolved mysteries. His case continues to inspire documentaries, podcasts, and articles, each attempting to shed new light on what happened that summer day in 1969. For many, it serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of venturing into the wilderness unprepared. For others, it represents the fragility of human existence and the limits of our ability to control the uncontrollable. Every year, on the anniversary of Dennis's disappearance, his family gathers to honor his memory. They release balloons into the sky, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the somber mood that hangs over the occasion. Though they may never know what truly happened to Dennis, they hold on to hope, and not necessarily for answers, but for peace for themselves, and perhaps for the little boy who vanished without a trace. The search for answers, modern efforts, and technological advances. As the years rolled on, the case of Dennis Martin remained unsolved, but it never truly faded from public consciousness. With advancements in technology and renewed interest in cold cases, investigators periodically revisited the evidence, hoping to uncover something that had been missed in 1969. Each new attempt brought fresh hope to Dennis's family and those who followed the case. Yet each effort also underscored just how elusive the truth could be. Reopening the case, a new generation of investigators. In the early 2000s, spurred by advances in forensic science and investigative techniques, authorities decided to take another look at Dennis Martin's disappearance. The passage of time had not erased the emotional weight of the case, nor had it diminished the determination of those committed to finding answers. Law enforcement agencies partnered with volunteer organizations specializing in missing persons cases, bringing together a diverse team of experts equipped with tools unimaginable in the late 1960s. One of the first steps was to re-examine the original search area using modern mapping software and satellite imagery. These technologies allowed investigators to create detailed topographical maps of Spencefield and its surrounding regions, identifying areas that may have been overlooked during the initial operation. Drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras were deployed to scan dense forests and steep ravines, searching for signs of human remains or other anomalies. Ground-penetrating radar, GPR, became another critical tool in the renewed investigation. This non-invasive technique uses electromagnetic waves to detect disturbances beneath the Earth's surface, such as buried objects or voids. Teams methodically swept over sections of the park where Dennis might have wandered, their devices humming softly as they probed the ground for clues. While GPR has proven effective in locating hidden grave sites in other cases, it yielded no definitive results in the Great Smoky Mountains, only tantalizing hints that kept investigators guessing. DNA analysis, a breakthrough that never came. Another avenue explored during the reinvestigation was DNA analysis. In recent decades, breakthroughs in genetic testing have revolutionized the field of forensic science. enabling investigators to identify remains even when only fragments are available. For Dennis's case, however, this approach faced significant hurdles. No physical evidence directly linked to Dennis, such as clothing, hair, or personal belongings, had ever been recovered. Without a sample to compare against, DNA testing offered little more than theoretical potential. Still, researchers held out hope that someone might come forward with information leading to tangible evidence. They issued public appeals for anyone who had visited the park around the time of Dennis's disappearance to share photographs, film reels, or artifacts that might contain traces of his presence. Social media campaigns amplified these calls, reaching audiences far beyond the borders of Tennessee. Despite widespread attention, nothing conclusive emerged. Psychic investigations, seeking guidance beyond science. For some, the lack of scientific progress prompted a turn toward less conventional methods. Psychics and mediums, long fascinated by Dennis Martin's story, offered their services in hopes of providing insight into what happened. Their claims varied widely, ranging from visions of Dennis wandering alone in the woods to impressions of violence or abduction. Skeptics dismissed these accounts as baseless speculation, while others clung to them as potential leads worth pursuing. One particularly notable psychic claimed to sense Dennis's energy emanating from a specific location deep within the park in Roe Gorge, known locally as the Devil's Bathtub. According to legend, this secluded spot was cursed, a place where hikers occasionally reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. When search teams investigated the area, they found no evidence connecting it to Dennis's disappearance. Nevertheless, the story added another layer of intrigue to the already enigmatic case. The cultural impact, from local tragedy to national fascination. Dennis Martin's disappearance transcended its origins as a local tragedy, evolving into a cultural phenomenon that captured the imagination of millions. It became a staple of true crime documentaries, podcasts, and books. Each retelling added new dimensions to the narrative. Writers and filmmakers drew inspiration from the haunting details, crafting fictionalized versions of the events that resonated with audiences hungry for stories of mystery and law. Documentaries and media coverage. Several high-profile documentaries have explored Dennis Martin's case, blending archival footage with interviews from key figures involved in the investigation. One standout production titled Vanished: The Dennis Martin Story premiered on a popular streaming platform in 2021. The film meticulously reconstructed the timeline of events, weaving together expert commentary, survivor testimonies, and dramatic reenactments. Its release reignited public interest in the case, prompting thousands of viewers to share theories and memories online. Podcasts dedicated to unsolved mysteries also embraced Dennis's story, devoting entire seasons to unraveling its complexities. Hosts dissected every aspect of the case, from the initial search efforts to the psychological toll on Dennis's family. Listeners responded enthusiastically, flooding comment sections with questions, hypotheses, and heartfelt tributes to the boy who vanished so suddenly. Literary explorations. Authors, too, found fertile ground in Dennis Martin's tale. Novels inspired by the case often blurred the lines between fact and fiction, imagining alternate outcomes or delving into the minds of those affected by the tragedy. Some works leaned heavily into supernatural elements, portraying Dennis as a spectral figure haunting the park. Others focused on the human drama, exploring themes of grief, guilt, and resilience. Regardless of their approach, these stories ensured that Dennis's memory would endure, even if the circumstances of his disappearance remained shrouded in uncertainty. The park today, a place of beauty and unease. Decades after Dennis Martin vanished, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park continues to attract visitors from across the globe. Its breathtaking vistas, diverse wildlife, and rich history make it one of the most beloved natural landmarks in the United States. Yet, for many, the park carries an undercurrent of unease, a reminder of the dangers lurking beneath its serene exterior. Hikers still flock to Spence Field, drawn by its panoramic views and challenging trails. Along the way, they pass markers commemorating Dennis's disappearances, mall plaques, that serve as poignant reminders of the fragility of life. Rangers often recount the story during guided tours, emphasizing the importance of safety precautions and preparedness. For some visitors, learning about Dennis's fate adds a sobering dimension to their experience, transforming a leisurely hike into a meditation on mortality. Others claim to feel an inexplicable chill when passing through certain parts of the park, particularly near the areas where Dennis was last seen. Whispers of ghostly encounters persist, with reports of shadowy figures darting between trees or disembodied voices calling out in the night. Whether these accounts stem from genuine paranormal activity or the power of suggestion remains open to interpretation. What is undeniable, however, is the lasting impression Dennis Martin's story has left on those who walk the same paths he once did. Despite all the investigations, theories, and cultural fascination, the central question remains unanswered. What really happened to Dennis Martin on that June afternoon in 1969? Was he lost, injured, or abducted? Did he succumb to the elements, fall prey to wildlife, or meet some other tragic end? Or does his spirit continue to linger in the park, silently watching as generations pass through its gates with no closure in sight? Through an empty highway in the dead of night. It was a cold, crisp evening on a lonely stretch of highway in Northern California, just after midnight. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows over the deserted road. Sarah had just finished a long shift at the diner in Crescent City, and the drive home to her small cabin outside town felt endless. She was used to the quiet isolation, but tonight, something felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. As she cruised down the highway, her headlights cutting through the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The trees along the roadside loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying with the wind. The sound of the tires on the asphalt was the only noise, broken only by the occasional chirp of a distant bird or the rustle of leaves. Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel as her thoughts began to wander. Was she just tired? Or was there something else in the air tonight? The empty road seemed unnaturally still, almost too still, and she couldn't help but glance nervously in the rearview mirror. And then, as if out of nowhere, a dark figure appeared in the reflection. It wasn't a car, not even a shadow, but something else, something wrong. Her heart raced as she turned to look. The passenger seat beside her was empty. She was alone, but the figure lingered in the mirror, a tall, shadowy figure, barely visible but unmistakable. Sarah blinked, rubbing her eyes. When she looked again, the figure was gone. Was it a trick of the light, or was she losing her mind from exhaustion? She told herself to stay calm and focused on the road ahead, but a creeping unease settled in her chest. Minutes passed, but the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it grew stronger. It was as if something or someone was sitting beside her now, watching her, waiting. The temperature seemed to drop, and Sarah shivered though. She had the heat on full blast. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty. Her eyes flicked once again to the rearview mirror. This time, the figure was closer, and now she could almost make out its shape, a tall man dressed in dark clothing with hollow, empty eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. His face was pale, almost lifeless. Frozen in terror, Sarah slammed her foot on the gas pedal, speeding up as the figure seemed to get closer and closer in the mirror. But no matter how fast she drove, the figure remained at her side, its presence growing more oppressive with each passing mile. She glanced around, desperate for any sign of life, anything to break the oppressive silence. But the road was empty, save for her car and the dark figure that seemed to shadow her every move. And then suddenly, the headlights flickered. Just for a split second, the car seemed to lose power. In that brief moment, the figure's face was clear in the mirror. Its twisted grin stretched across its face, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She looked back to the road, hoping the figure would disappear, but it didn't. It never did. And then something even more terrifying happened. A voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered from the empty passenger seat. "You're not alone." Sarah froze at the sound of the voice, her blood running cold. Her mind screamed at her to look to her right, to face whatever was there, but her body refused to obey. She felt as though her entire being was locked in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. The voice had been so clear, so close, and yet there was no one beside her. The road stretched on before her, unbroken and endless, as if mocking her growing panic. She was sure she was hallucinating, her exhaustion getting the better of her. But that voice, it wasn't a trick. It was real, and it was coming from somewhere inside her car. "You're not alone." The whisper echoed in her mind, its coldness crawling up her spine. Sarah shook her head and gripped the steering wheel tighter, willing herself to focus on the road. She forced her eyes to stay straight ahead, telling herself it was just her nerves, the long hours at work, the isolation of driving on a desolate highway in the middle of the night. The figure in the mirror didn't go away. She glanced again, her heart pounding in her chest as the shadow seemed to shift, inching closer with every passing second. It was as if it was moving in sync with her, its presence more menacing with every moment that passed. "Please," Sarah whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Just get home. Just get home." Her mind raced, searching for some explanation, a trick of the light. Maybe the fatigue was messing with her senses, or perhaps the isolation had driven her to the edge of sanity. But deep down, she knew that something was wrong, something she couldn't explain. The road was empty, yes, but the air was thick with something she couldn't name. She took a deep breath and decided she needed to get off the highway, to stop for a moment, to gather her thoughts. Maybe it was the stillness of the night playing tricks on her. She wasn't sure how much longer she could handle the tension building in her chest. But before she could pull over, the temperature inside the car dropped even further. A cold draft brushed across her neck, and she gasped, her fingers trembling on the wheel. The lights of her dashboard flickered, and for a brief moment, the road ahead seemed to blur into nothingness. "You're not alone." This time, the voice was louder, unmistakable. It was no longer a whisper, but a low, menacing, off the highway to stop for a moment, to gather her thoughts. Maybe it was the stillness of the night playing tricks on her. She wasn't sure how much longer she could handle the tension building in her chest. But before she could pull over, the temperature inside the car dropped even further. A cold draft brushed across her neck, and she gasped, her fingers trembling on the wheel. The lights of her dashboard flickered, and for a brief moment, the road ahead seemed to blur into nothingness. "You're not alone." This time the voice was louder, unmistakable. It was no longer a whisper, but a low, menacing murmur that seemed to come from directly beside her. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she turned her head, her breath catching in her throat, but there was nothing. The passenger seat was still empty. Her mind raced, her thoughts tumbling over one another. Was she imagining it? Was this some kind of breakdown after the stress of the past few months? Or was there something truly wrong? She couldn't bring herself to look in the rearview mirror again. The sight of that figure was enough to send her into a full-blown panic. She could feel the presence behind her, though like a weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw something move, a shadow, a figure in the dark, just off the side of the road. It was barely visible, but it was there. She slammed on the brakes, her heart racing, but the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. She glanced frantically around. The road was empty. No cars, no people, just her and the endless stretch of highway. The silence was deafening. She continued driving, faster now, hoping the quicker pace would outrun whatever was happening. But every so often, she would catch a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision, something shifting in the darkness, just beyond the headlights. At first, it was small, just a flicker of something in the trees, a shadow in the distance. But then the movements grew closer. Every few seconds, she would glance in the rearview mirror. The figure was there, closer now. It was almost as if it was keeping pace with her, traveling alongside her in the darkness. She could feel its presence, as if it were sitting just beside her, its breath hot against her skin. But when she looked, there was nothing there. The chill in the car grew more intense. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering uncontrollably. She needed to stop, to think, to figure out what was happening. She could see a small gas station up ahead, its lights flickering weakly in the distance. Maybe there was someone there. Maybe someone could help. But as she neared the station, she saw something that made her stomach drop. The pumps were dark. The building was empty. No lights, no sign of life. She slammed her foot on the brake and skidded to a halt in front of the deserted station. She sat there for a moment, her hands gripping the wheel as she tried to steady her breathing. The silence outside the car was suffocating. The wind had picked up, howling through the empty station, and the trees along the side of the road swayed violently in the breeze. It was too quiet. There was something wrong about this place. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it again. A figure standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. Its outline was faint, almost translucent, but it was unmistakable. The figure was tall, thin, and its face was turned away, hidden in shadow. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the figure slowly turned its head to face her. It wasn't human. The face that emerged from the shadows was pale, gaunt, its features distorted in an unnatural way. Its eyes were wide and unblinking, staring directly at her through the windshield. There was no expression, no emotion, just a cold, empty gaze that seemed to pierce through her soul. "You're not alone." The voice came again, this time louder, more forceful. It vibrated through her chest, making her feel like her heart was about to burst. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The figure stepped forward, its long, thin limbs reaching out toward her. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She threw the car into reverse and sped away from the station, not daring to look back. The car's engine roared to life as she accelerated. But the figure, it followed her. She could feel it lurking just behind her, its presence never faltering. Her hands were shaking, her mind spinning in terror. Where could she go? What could she do? The road ahead stretched on, empty and endless. She was trapped. She didn't know how much longer she could keep driving, how much longer she could outrun the darkness that had come for her. And then, as the miles blurred by, the car began to sputter. The engine choked, its power waning. Panic surged through her as she realized that the fuel gauge was dangerously close to empty. She hadn't even noticed in her frantic state, but now it was too late. The car coasted to a stop on the side of the road, its engine dead. She was stranded, and that was when the whisper came again. "You're not alone." This time it was louder, closer, and she knew without a doubt that it was coming from inside the car, from the empty passenger seat beside her. And the darkness outside the car felt like it was closing in. Sarah could hear the wind howling through the trees, but the rest of the world was silent. The engine had given out completely, and she was stranded in the middle of nowhere. Panic surged in her chest, her pulse quickening as she fumbled for her phone. She needed to call for help, needed to find a way out of this situation. Her fingers shook as she unlocked the screen, but the signal was dead. Nothing. She cursed under her breath and shoved the phone back into her pocket, feeling the weight of the silence settle around her. The presence was still there. She could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. It was like a shadow following her every move, never allowing her to breathe easy. She tried to convince herself it was just her mind playing tricks, but the longer she sat in the car, the more real the sensation became. The whispering voice echoed in her mind again, and this time it felt closer, so close. It was like someone was breathing on her neck. "You're not alone." The words were clear now, distinct, and Sarah felt a cold chill crawl up her spine. She whipped her head around, heart thudding in her chest, but the passenger seat remained empty. No one was there. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was with her. Her eyes flicked nervously to the rearview mirror. She half expected to see that shadowy figure standing there, watching her. But the mirror reflected only darkness, the black expanse of the road, and the faintest glimmer of the moon overhead. The air in the car seemed to thicken, pressing down on her chest. It was as though the very space around her, had become oppressive, suffocating. She rolled down the window in an attempt to clear the air, but the moment the wind hit her skin, she felt something cold brush past her like a shadow moving through the car. Her breath hitched, and she jerked her head around again. Still no one. She had to get out. She couldn't stay in the car. If she stayed, she knew it would drive her mad. But the thought of stepping out into the pitch-black night into the wilderness where anything could be hiding was terrifying. The trees on either side of the road loomed like monstrous figures in the darkness, their branches creaking in the wind. Still, the sense of dread gnawed at her, urging her to act. With a shaky breath, she opened the door and stepped out of the car. The chill in the air cut through her jacket, and she shivered uncontrollably as her feet crunched on the gravel of the roadside. She couldn't remember when the last car had passed by, if any had at all. The highway felt deserted, isolated, like it had been abandoned long ago. There was no sign of civilization anywhere. No houses, no lights, just the open road stretching on for miles. But she wasn't alone. The thought flashed through her mind again, sending a ripple of cold fear through her veins. She couldn't escape it. The presence was still there, just beyond the edges of her perception, lingering in the shadows. She glanced over her shoulder, but there was nothing in sight, just the road stretching endlessly into the dark void of the night. It was then that she heard something, a soft sound, like faint rustling. She turned sharply, her heart leaping into her throat, but when she looked, she saw nothing. The trees swayed in the wind, their branches creaking and groaning like old bones. It was quiet, too quiet. She took a step forward, her shoes scraping against the gravel as she moved closer to the edge of the road. But then she froze. There, in the distance, she saw something, a figure standing motionless by the trees. It was tall, impossibly still, its face hidden in the shadows. It was watching her. The air around her seemed to thicken, and the feeling of dread surged once again. Her feet felt like lead, as if the earth itself were trying to hold her in place. She should have run. She should have gotten back in the car, but something rooted her to the spot. The figure moved. It was slow at first, like it was savoring the moment. The figure stepped forward, its movements unnaturally smooth, gliding over the ground without a sound. Its form was thin, almost skeletal, and as it drew closer, Sarah could make out the faint glow of its eyes, dark and hollow, like two black holes staring right through her. She stumbled backward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She wanted to scream, but her throat felt dry. Her voice caught in her chest. The figure kept coming, its form growing clearer with every step. It didn't make a sound. There was no crunch of footsteps on the gravel, no rustling of clothing, just the movement of something unnatural, something wrong. The figure stopped, just a few feet away from her, its eyes locked on hers. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It simply stood there, towering over her, as if it were waiting for something. She couldn't take it anymore. With a scream that broke through the silence of the night, she turned and ran. Her legs burned as she pushed herself to run faster, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of her footsteps was deafening in the quiet. But when she glanced over her shoulder, the figure was still there, standing motionless, watching. Her car was a distant blur behind her, but she had to get back to it. She had to get inside, lock the doors, get away from whatever was stalking her. The ground seemed to stretch farther than she remembered, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, she reached the car, her hand trembling as she fumbled for the door handle. She yanked it open and threw herself inside, slamming the door behind her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she locked the doors with shaking hands. For a moment, she just sat there, gasping for air, staring at the empty road ahead. The figure was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. She couldn't let herself relax. Not yet. She couldn't even bring herself to look around. The air in the car felt thick again, like something was pressing down on her, suffocating her. Then the whisper returned. "You're not alone." It came from the back seat. Her head snapped around, but the rearview mirror reflected nothing. The back seat was empty, just the shadow of the seat itself. She couldn't breathe. Her heart was a drumbeat in her ears as she fumbled for the ignition. With trembling hands, she turned the key. The engine sputtered to life. She pressed the gas pedal, her foot trembling, and the car lurched forward. The road ahead was empty. There was no sign of the figure, no sign of anything, just the dark, endless highway stretching before her. But the whisper lingered in her mind, persistent, relentless. "You're not alone." The car sped down the highway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. But Sarah knew deep down. She knew that no matter how fast she drove, she would never outrun whatever it was that had followed her. The thing that had whispered to her. The thing that had been with her since the moment she had gotten into the car. The road seemed to stretch on forever, but the darkness was always there, lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights. She wasn't alone, and no matter how far she drove, she never would be again. The engine roared louder as Sarah pressed her foot harder on the accelerator, her grip tight on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The moon was barely a sliver in the sky, offering no comfort in the oppressive darkness that surrounded her. Thoughts spun in frantic circles, each more terrifying than the last. The figure, the whisper, the unmistakable sense of being watched. She glanced in the rearview mirror again, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the black highway stretching endlessly into the night. Still, the feeling lingered, that gnawing, suffocating presence that hung over her like a storm cloud, dark and unrelenting. She couldn't shake it. Her mind wandered to the thought of how she'd ended up here, driving along this desolate stretch of road with nothing but the whispering wind and her racing heartbeat to keep her company. She had left Crescent City hours ago, the small town where she'd worked as a waitress at the diner. She had seen the same familiar faces every day, exchanged pleasantries, shared laughs with customers who had become regulars over the years. But tonight, it had all felt different. The air had been thicker than usual, as though the weight of something unseen was pressing down on her. She should have noticed the signs then, should have turned back. But it had been a long shift, and all she could think about was the quiet of her cabin. The whispering voice had come out of nowhere, and the figure, it was the first time she had ever seen something so unnatural, something so wrong. But was it real? Had it been the product of her mind, conjured from the exhaustion of a long day, or had something truly followed her? She wanted to stop, to turn around, to call someone, anyone. But the closer she got to safety, the more her fears twisted, making her believe that no matter what, she would never escape what had latched onto her. Her eyes kept darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, always waiting for that shadow to appear again. Her foot pressed even harder on the gas pedal, but it didn't help. It didn't make the darkness go away. Minutes turned to hours as Sarah continued to drive. She lost track of time, the constant hum of the tires on the asphalt turning into a monotonous drone. It was all she could focus on, to keep her mind from spiraling further. She didn't know where she was anymore, didn't know how far she had gone. But the feeling never left. She was being followed. She didn't dare look in the rearview mirror again, knowing that whatever was there would be waiting for her, just behind her, lurking in the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat, and she clutched the wheel even tighter as her chest tightened with every passing second. That's when she saw it, headlights in the distance, far behind her. A car. It was coming fast. A sense of dread washed over her. Was it just a passing vehicle, or was it something else? She had to know. She had to see it for herself. With her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah pulled to the side of the road, letting the car coast to a slow stop. The headlights grew brighter, closer, but the car wasn't slowing down. It was coming at her, and it was coming fast. Panic surged through her veins, and she jerked the wheel, pulling back onto the road and accelerating again. The headlights behind her, the headlights grew more intense. Whoever was driving, they weren't stopping. Sarah's palms grew slick with sweat as she pushed the pedal to the floor. The engine screamed in protest, but she kept going faster. She had to outrun them. She had to get away. But then something strange happened. The car behind her began to fade, its headlights dimming as if the vehicle was retreating. But that didn't make her feel better. It only made the air feel colder, emptier. She glanced in the rearview mirror expecting to see nothing. But to her shock, the figure was back. It was no longer standing by the side of the road. It was inside the car. The figure was in the back seat. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and her heart skipped a beat. Her entire body froze. She didn't dare turn around, not for a single moment. She couldn't. If she did, if she allowed herself to face it, she knew she wouldn't be able to escape. The figure's presence was unmistakable. It was tall, too tall, with elongated limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Its eyes, those hollow eyes that had been nothing but black voids, were now wide open, staring at her with an intensity that made her feel as though her very soul was being pulled into them. She heard a soft rustling from the back seat, the figure's slow movements, impossibly quiet. It was as if it was savoring the moment, knowing that Sarah was trapped, unable to flee, unable to escape. The car began to slow. She hadn't realized it at first, but the speed was dropping. She looked down in horror to see that her foot had lifted off the gas pedal, and the car was coasting again, losing momentum. No, no, no. She couldn't stop now. She couldn't let whatever that thing was get closer. But her foot wouldn't move. It was like her body was no longer her own. It felt as though something was holding her down, rooting her in place. The shadows in the back seat seemed to grow, reaching toward her like tendrils, pulling the air around her tighter and tighter. She could feel the figure behind her, could feel its cold, breathless gaze, even though she refused to look. The car was barely moving now. The engine sputtered weakly, as if it too were succumbing to whatever force had taken over. It whispered again, the voice cold and insistent. "You're not alone." She slammed her foot back on the accelerator, forcing the car to lurch forward once more, but this time the movement was sluggish. Her mind screamed at her to push harder, to escape, but her body was unwilling to comply. The whispers grew louder, closer, as if the very air around her had become filled with the sound of them. She glanced briefly in the rearview mirror. The figure was closer now, its form looming over the seat, its hollow eyes gleaming with that same dreadful glow. Its mouth opened slowly, a distorted skeletal grin spreading across its face. The voice, now louder than ever, came again. "You can't escape. You're already mine." The words sent a shock of terror through her, and her heart hammered in her chest as she looked forward again, her vision swimming. She couldn't think. She couldn't move. And then, just as quickly as the figure had appeared, the car jolted violently, shaking as though it had hit something. Sarah's hands flew to the wheel to steady herself, and she looked around, trying to make sense of what had happened. The world outside her car was completely dark now. The moon had disappeared behind a thick cloud cover, leaving her in a stifling blackness. She couldn't see a single thing beyond the glow of her headlights. Suddenly, she saw a sign up ahead, illuminated in the distance. She squinted at it, trying to make out the letters. But as she got closer, the sign became more blurred, more distorted. The words began to shift, to twist, as though they were written in a language she didn't understand. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. But the figure's voice was still there, loud and insistent, like it was in her head. "You're not alone." It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. A promise that no matter where she went, no matter how fast she drove, she would never be free from the presence that stalked her. The sign loomed larger, its twisted words almost visible now. She was too close, and the words were coming into focus. And then the car stopped. Everything went still. The engine sputtered one last time and died. The headlights went out, plunging her into complete darkness. The figure was in the back seat. She wasn't alone. The car was completely still, as if time itself had frozen. The engine was silent now, leaving only the ominous sound of her breathing, shallow and ragged. The air around her seemed impossibly thick, suffocating, like she was surrounded by something heavy, pressing down on her chest. The chill in the air crept through the car's thin walls, biting at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the cold that radiated from the back seat. Sarah's eyes were locked on the rearview mirror, unable to look anywhere else. She could feel the presence behind her, could sense it without even needing to turn around. The figure was still there, just beyond her line of sight, watching her with those dark, hollow eyes. She didn't need to see it to know that it was waiting just as it always had been. Its presence was undeniable, and it felt as though it had been a part of her life for much longer than this terrifying moment. She swallowed hard, her throat dry and tight. Her hands trembled as they gripped the steering wheel, and she fought the urge to look behind her. If she did, she wasn't sure she'd be able to keep herself together. The figure's presence was like a weight, pulling her down into the abyss. Every breath she took felt like it was being drawn from a place of deep, dark despair. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening, the figure in the back seat, the whispers, the car that had followed her. She had to get out. She had to escape. But the engine was dead, and no matter how much she tried, she couldn't seem to make her body move. The figure shifted. It was subtle at first, but Sarah felt the movement in the air around her, a shift in the atmosphere. The figure was moving closer. She didn't know how she knew, but she felt it in the deepest part of her being. Something dark and malevolent was drawing near. Her breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively reached for the door handle, desperate to escape, but her hand froze mid-motion, her fingers refusing to move. She couldn't leave. Not yet. The voice came again, this time softer but more insistent. "You can't run from me." It was a whisper, barely audible, but it reverberated in her mind, in her very soul. Sarah's stomach churned. She had heard that voice before on the side of the road, in the woods, in the quiet of her cabin. It was the same voice, the same presence, and it was growing stronger, closer, more real. She wanted to scream. She wanted to lash out, to do anything to break the hold this thing had on her, but her body felt paralyzed, trapped by the weight of the darkness that filled the car. It was suffocating, and the air felt thinner with each passing second. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, its frantic rhythm matching the beat of her thoughts. She had to fight it, but how? The figure in the back seat didn't make a sound. It simply lingered, its presence overwhelming the small space of the car. It was as if it was feeding off her fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts frantically trying to find a way out, but there was no escape. Every possibility, every idea she had, was swallowed up by the darkness. She was trapped, and no matter how fast she drove, no matter where she went, it would always be with her. The car began to move again. The motion was subtle at first, as though the car was being pushed along the road by an invisible hand. Sarah's eyes widened in terror as she realized that the car was moving on its own, without the aid of the engine. The steering wheel shifted in her grip, as though it was being guided by some unseen force. Her foot was no longer on the brake, and the car slowly began to roll forward, picking up speed. She tried to slam her foot on the brake, but it was as if the pedals had become unresponsive, as though the car itself had taken control. The road ahead was a blur, the lines and markings indistinguishable in the darkness. She was no longer in control. And then the whispers returned, louder this time, echoing in her mind, rattling her thoughts. "You're mine." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, her hands gripping the wheel tighter as the car hurtled down the road. The headlights were the only source of light in the darkness, but the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly before her, like a tunnel that went on forever. The figure in the back seat was still there. She could feel it, could feel its cold presence behind her, like a dark cloud pressing against her skin. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything but the overwhelming sensation that something was going to reach out from the shadows and pull her into the void. She had to stop the car. She had to stop the car before it took her somewhere she couldn't return from. With every ounce of willpower she could muster, she forced her foot onto the brake. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, just as she thought she was completely powerless, the car screeched to a halt. But the figure was still there. The presence in the back seat wasn't gone. It was only getting stronger, its dark energy filling the car, surrounding her in an inescapable embrace. Sarah's heart raced as she gripped the wheel, her hands slick with sweat. She didn't know what to do, where to go. She had never been this afraid in her life. She needed help. She needed someone, anyone, to save her from this nightmare. But there was no one. The car was completely still now, but the figure in the back seat was no less present. It was as if it had settled into the very fabric of the car, becoming one with it. Its eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, burned into her soul. "You'll never be free," it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. "You'll never escape me." And then the car started moving again. But this time it wasn't the same road. The world outside the car had shifted, distorted, as though the very fabric of reality had been twisted. The road was no longer familiar, and Sarah had no idea where she was. The trees that had lined the road before were gone, replaced by something far more sinister, tall, jagged rocks that reached up like dark claws, their shadows stretching impossibly long. The headlights flickered, casting eerie, fractured shadows across the desolate landscape. It was as if the world itself had become a distorted reflection of itself, a nightmare come to life. The figure's eyes never left her. It was always there, always watching. Sarah's mind was reeling. What was happening? Where was she? What was this place? The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling every corner of her mind, drowning out all other thoughts. "You're mine," it repeated forever. She screamed. She couldn't stop herself. The sound of her voice was raw, frantic, desperate for someone, anyone to hear her. But there was no one. The world around her was empty, desolate, and unyielding. The figure was still there, its presence suffocating, as if it was the only thing left in this twisted reality. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't stop driving. She had to get away. She had to break free. But the more she tried, the more the world seemed to close in around her. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the car stopped again. The silence was deafening. Sarah's mind was a blur. She couldn't think, couldn't make sense of anything anymore. All she knew was that she was no longer alone. She hadn't been alone for a long time. The presence in the back seat, the whispers in her mind, the unrelenting feeling of being watched, it was all too much. And then the figure spoke once more. "You'll never escape." But this time there was no whisper. There was no voice. There was only the overwhelming, all-encompassing presence of the thing that had been with her all along. She had never been alone, and now she never would be again. The car screeched to a halt, and for a moment everything was silent. Sarah's heart raced as the oppressive presence in the back seat grew even stronger. She could feel the figure's cold eyes on her, but she refused to look. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, but she couldn't give in. With a surge of willpower, Sarah slammed her foot on the gas pedal, the car jolting forward into the night. The road ahead blurred as she sped through the darkness, the figure's presence never leaving her. But the road ahead seemed endless, and no matter how fast she drove, the whispers grew louder, more persistent. Then, without warning, the car jerked to a stop, and the headlights flickered and died. The darkness closed in, and Sarah could feel the figure moving closer, its cold fingers brushing her skin. She couldn't breathe. Suddenly, she heard the sound of another car approaching. Desperately, she threw open the door and ran toward it. The vehicle slowed as she reached it, and the window rolled down. "Are you all right?" the driver asked, voice full of concern. Without a word, Sarah jumped into the passenger seat, and the car sped away. The figure was gone. The whispers faded into nothing. But as she glanced back at the road, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following her, waiting for the next time she would be alone.